Should we give another 2 or 3 minutes, Joelle?
Sure, sounds good. 2 minutes. Hey, Wendy.
I'm wondering if Mike is here yet, Mike Murphy.
Mike Murphy's not gonna come.
Uh,
He emailed a little earlier. So I think we could probably start and then
yeah.
whenever you're ready, Sam.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shyam Sharma. I have been with SUNY Cal for quite a few years, and I currently serve as the Vice President. And today I am helping out as a facilitator for the webinar. This is the first of a series that we're trying to put together this summer and coming fall. Part of our initiatives during the pandemic. And it is also a follow-up of webinars, discussions that we did back in spring, alongside what we called office hours, and an initiative called SUNY Writes. Hi, Amy. A blog on the SUNY Council on writing.wordpress.com, where we are trying to get colleagues' thoughts, reflections, experiences, and share them with the SUNY Cal community. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, share it.
Especially because our regular annual conference has been disrupted, we are also trying to add, in addition to this informal, ongoing back-channel conversation online, we're trying to do something in lieu of the conference in maybe October. So stay tuned and please join and please advertise and help us to keep the conversation going. Today's webinar was developed in the context of the sort of course planning that we're doing, semester planning that we're doing, as we look forward, as we anticipate a really uncertain and challenging, which may be challenging, more challenging than the second half of spring in its own ways, kind of semester. And so what we will do today is I would like to start with a quick brainstorming sort of audience involved activity. I'd like you to take pen and paper, or maybe even write on the chat box what sort of main challenges you are dealing with or addressing, and what strategies you're using to address those challenges. It may be at the level of pedagogical principle or pedagogical strategy. Think about, when you think about challenges, think about things such as some of the things that our panelists will be covering today. So you begin to think along those same lines, such as trauma, and on the sort of strategy side, mindfulness, student agency and student-centered and critical pedagogy, maybe even labor-based grading or contract grading. On the challenge sides, workload and stress, economic and family issues that we may not be able to address but may want to be mindful. Time management and study skills that students may not have under, these different hybrid, high flex, disrupted distance learning situation. And the kinds of accommodation that we need to make, the nature of accountability that we need to reconstruct, and so on and so forth. So think about challenges and think about strategies. How are we going to overcome them? And save your notes. And so as after we give the panelists a chance to present their ideas, we will connect the dots and begin to relate to each other's ideas. As you write, everybody, I will read out the one single question that I have for all panelists. We used to ask distinct questions, but we changed strategy and came up with a single question. Here's the question for you panelists, and I'm going to ask panelists to introduce themselves. I think this is the order in which you have written yourself, here in the notes. Joelle Mann, Michael O'Connor, I think Laura Davies. Kristina Lucenko is not here today because of a power outage, and I will try to cover some additional things because I too was an original panel member before I decided to become facilitator, but maybe if there is time, I will try to add a few notes at the end. So the question is, how are you approaching your course design and semester planning, and with what key challenges in mind? What are your principles, pedagogical principles and strategies for addressing those challenges? In other words, the same question in written form that I asked everybody. I will also post this question in chat. So, okay, a few more minutes, everybody. Jot down a few notes.
Please.
This is to suggest that we will save plenty of time and ask you all to share your thoughts and to ask the panelists to strictly limit their thoughts within 10 minutes. 7 is much, much better than 10, okay? so that by 35-ish, we are discussing. And we will go no longer than 90 minutes total. Okay, you can keep writing. Joelle, your turn, please. Over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sam. My name is Joelle Mann, and I work for the Writing Initiative at Binghamton University. So I just want to, before I kind of go into some of my own concerns, I just want to talk about overall when we were planning this webinar, we did intend to make it more of a conversation than anything else. I know that I'm a new member of the board this year, and one thing that has really helped me is just to listen to hear what other people are thinking about and are doing, right? And then that has sent my own kind of brainstorming gone amok, I'd say. So just to be mindful of that, if you have something to say or something to comment on, you can put it in the chat. You can wait till we open up discussion. But the panelists today are just really presenting based on kind of their own situation at their own personal kind of schools. So we tried to get kind of a variety of schools represented with a variety of teaching models. So with that said, Binghamton University has a number of things going on in the fall. However, and I'm going to focus specifically on a freshman writing class that I'm teaching, I am functioning in what we would call a Bing Flex model. And what that basically means is I will have alternating teaching weeks. I will teach a week in class, in person to my students, and then a week online. And so when I first kind of heard about this model, of course, it made me anxious in a number of different ways because my greatest challenge is bridging, right, those two types of classes into one kind of cohesive central class. We all know that teaching online is very different from teaching in person. They require different things. And they require kind of different roles, as myself as a teacher and students as well. And so I've been trying to think about this most of the summer. I'm well into my planning, and I still have kind of some unique anxieties. But with that said, based on the discussion I had last week with Mike and Sam, one thing that we had kind of discussed and Mike had noticed also was this idea that there were instructors that were trying to lean on some traditional pedagogies. Based on, you know, fatigue, anxiety, everything that everyone had been through in the spring, and kind of, you know, my role here is really to challenge, right, that traditional kind of thinking. And so part of what I'm going to share with you today is kind of a way that I'm trying to do that specifically in a freshman writing class. So because I teach mainly freshmen, I not only, right, am concerned with teaching academic writing, but I'm concerned about immersing them into this larger intellectual community. That's my job. And to not only help them to understand the type of civic discourse and academic discourse, but, you know, this larger digital community that is scholarly, as evidenced by this group of people together right now. And so I've tried to think about molding those two things together and to try to think about, okay, if there's a silver lining right now in this situation, it is that, you know, I have a responsibility to address the cultural and political rhetoric of the moment, certainly. And so I am going to try to think about not only the material effects of the virus, but the rhetorical effects of the virus, which has kind of traumatized our society in a huge way, and even globally. So what am I doing? Well, I'm going to try to bring back slow pedagogy and slow writing. And so specifically, if you're not familiar with it, slow pedagogy, right, it came about with the slow movement in the early 2000s. And it seeks to achieve a kind of healthy relational bond among students and instructor, and a sense of connectedness to the local specifically. And so while it is originated kind of in ecological vein, right, to think about sustainability, I'm trying to think about this idea of sustainability across a number of different levels, not just ecologically, but based on relationships, based on the technologies we use. And I'm trying to think about that in terms of my freshman writing class. Particularly, it's a kind of pedagogy that counters, right, this fast-paced, assessment-driven, kind of cram in as much as you can type of assessment that I feel specifically right now in this moment, it is really important for us to counter, to kind of think about this holistic way of educating and think about an ethics of care. Mike kind of made a great point last week when I was talking to him to talk about how they've been trying to think about kind of K-12, right, different ways of thinking about this kind of ethics of care. Because, and I can speak this as a person who is a new hire at Binghamton, a lot of the other new hires that I've been hired with have they're very driven based on what does the administration want me to do, or what are the standards I'm trying to uphold, and there's a missing gap there, I think, in what's going on, and how do I address what's going on, the trauma that is kind of permeated among all of us. So that is what I'm trying to generously do, right? Try to think about this idea of what Kathleen Fitzpatrick dubs as generous thinking. A mode of engagement that emphasizes listening over speaking, and I'm particularly reframing how I teach rhetoric, not only as being the art of kind of speaking or writing, but the art of listening. And particularly, I think this would be helpful because it's often difficult to get my freshmen to think about a text from an audience's point of view. Who is the writer addressing and why? And so I'm going to try to flip, I think those roles right from the start this semester. So why is this important for me? Well, for me, it's important for three main reasons. Number one, distraction in the home learning environment is real and different for all of our students, and I have to account for it. Number two, again, as I said, we're inundated with negative rhetoric and media, and so it's important to be mindful of the ways that's affected our students and ourselves, and how we respond to and challenge it. And then finally, and this is something I've been grappling with since the spring really, our students aren't just taking one online class. They're taking multiple classes that are online or hybrid, and we have to account for their adjusting to that schedule. I think originally when online teaching was created, it was created for, the non-traditional student to take, this asynchronous class. And now, I have some 19-year-olds who are taking 5 courses online at once. And that is overwhelming, especially when you're confronted with a screen kind of all the time. So slowing down, accentuating main elements is an important part of my planning. In effect, I'm trying to teach the value of deceleration and immersive attention. And then finally, because I'm doing kind of this on-week, off-week kind of lapse, I've actually planned kind of 2-week units, right? Small segments that I've created in 2 weeks. And my offline weeks are post-in-week kind of discussions where I've created a situation where students become moderators of the discussions in small groups. The week on the offline or the online weeks are framed either by a podcast, a guest lecturer, a field expert, that then is supposed to incite students to create questions and then to proceed. And so what I've tried to do is create my online weeks as weeks to reinforce major concepts or to spread those concepts out after I've introduced certain things during my in-class weeks. With that said, and I know I'm kind of rambling here, but I want to make one more statement about my in-class sessions, because at times I am more worried about my in-class sessions than my out-of-class sessions. Certainly I'm afraid to be in the classroom a little bit, the social distance while wearing a mask while my students are wearing a mask, and I'm trying to think about a way to collaborate in those kinds of conditions. And so what I've been trying to do is think about the ways to scaffold writing brainstorming, right? Which I think in-person sessions are very important for kind of those kind of moments. I'm bringing back the mind map, right? In a very kind of physical, tangible way in my class, so that students can kind of move around and kind of use a space together to write on things one at a time. And so I'm trying to think about different ways to also set up my classroom structure, including some outside sessions and so on and so forth. So that's a little bit what I'm doing, and there's more, and maybe we'll get to more of it in the class, but I am trying to think about this idea of slow pedagogy, slowing down, and specifically, if you are interested, some of the major units I'm thinking about or that I've created for my classes include kind of the following 4 major topics, right? Certainly ecological sustainability, sustainable relationships, ethics and equities, and technology. So those are my kind of 4 major movements as I'm trying to think about research, writing, and rhetoric for these freshmen specifically.
Thank you, Joelle.
You're welcome.
Laura? Let's save questions for the end. Laura, 7 to 10 minutes. I'll remind you toward the end.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Davies. I'm from SUNY Cortland, where I'm the director of first-year writing and writing across the curriculum. And I'm talking to you in the middle of planning my courses and about, I'm designing stuff one day and I'm deleting it the next day. So I'm in the shifting uncertainty, as many of you are. What I want to talk to you about today is how I'm going to be relying more on labor-based grading contracts or labor-based grading in my fall 2020 online course. I'm going to be teaching completely online in fall. And so what I want to do first is just kind of describe what contract or labor-based grading is. I know many of you are very familiar with this, but some of you, it might be a new term to describe a practice that you might know already. And it is labor-based grading comes from the work in writing assessment that is accounting for and addressing the structural racism that's inherent in writing assessment. And it also responds to the long tradition in our field of process-oriented pedagogy. And most notably, many of you might know of Asao Inoue's work and his framework for contract grading, which has been adapted by numerous scholars in our field. And at my institution, there's been a lot of interest in contract or labor-based grading since last year. And so this is kind of a continuation of an inquiry my program and my teachers have had over the past year. I want to describe to you why I'm kind of drawn towards labor-based grading, contract grading for this pandemic reality or uncertain reality. And number one, it's because I feel like it does a good job of engaging students in the core learning outcomes of my course. Specifically, I'm talking right now about first year writing, although I've used this in other upper division education classes and professional writing classes. And so the way contract-based grading works for me is it helps me simplify and focus my objectives on those core learning outcomes and helps my students focus on them as well. Second, I feel like labor-based grading is probably the most equitable choice I can make for my students and their shifting needs in this pandemic. We have students all around the state, who are in different hotspots. And I feel like this kind of grading contract gives them the expectations of the course and is more flexible and accommodating their various needs. Obviously, I'm also drawn to the idea that it is a much more equitable, in my opinion, approach to writing instruction and writing assessment. Its anti-racist principles are something that I find incredible value in and I believe in. Also, grading contracts, because they don't require me to justify grades at every single point of the semester to my students, they open it up for me to be more critical of my students' writing in a better, more productive way. And I'll explain about that in a little bit. I believe it's gonna be a lot more flexible for me. I have childcare concerns for the fall. My student's school is most definitely gonna be going remotely. My kid's school would be going remotely, and so I'm going to be dealing with that. And because contract grading, labor-based grading really emphasizes in the version I'm using, student choice and student agency. So let me tell you a little bit about labor-based grading contracts, labor-based grading. There's a lot of literature about this, and so I'm just going to give you a little teaser right now. And what it does is it emphasizes process and revision, the practice of drafting and writing. Students are guaranteed, in some versions, in the version I'm using, a base grade. So for my course, if students complete all the different parts of their writing projects, if they submit them on time, I give them a 48-hour grace period window. And if they meet the minimum word count requirements and the minimum basic expectations, all students are guaranteed a B. And they can get higher than a B by doing certain extra parts that will allow them to think about the writing project in new ways. They can remix something for a more public audience. They can do an audience analysis of their research paper. They can visit the writing center and have a consultant work with them on their writing. They can create a nonlinear argument map. I have all these different extra parts that they can add on to raise their grades. The grading contract, I used a version of this in the spring where I used a grading contract for one of my course's assignments. I have 3 assignments in each course, and it worked well. So I'm really shifting right now to trying to make the entire course a grading contract model. But let me tell you a little, so that's a little bit about grading contracts and how I'm interpreting them and how I'm using them in my course. But some concerns I have, the reason I'm designing things and then deleting them the next day, is that I want to make them, I had the benefit of explaining this in person to my students in the spring. And I think that conversation we had in class over several class periods about the reasons behind labor-based grading and how it's different from what they're used to and how it's going to work was really crucial in making it work. And so I'm worried about doing that in an all online version of the course. Like I will have synchronous components, but I can't guarantee my own internet connection and my students' internet connection. So I'm worried about that. Making it clear to the students about the expectations, but not in an overwhelming way. Like I started deleting things because I had copious amounts of color-coded tables, and then I decided that was not the approach to take. You also, when I tell my colleagues about labor-based grading, I sometimes get looks like, oh, well, that's not very rigorous. And so being able to respond to the actual data that shows the rigor and the benefits of labor-based grading, to be able to respond to colleagues, but also to tell students, like, this is why we're doing it, and it does have value. And then to make a contract, this is all based on students accepting this contract, a contract for a grade, but to build in enough flexibility for whatever's going to happen this semester. And the uncertainty of that. So building a structure, but having it be malleable enough so that it continues to ensure equity instead of reinforcing inequities. So I hope that was helpful, just to kind of briefly explain the kind of labor-based contract that I'm working with and some of the bigger questions that are making the design of it so difficult for me. So, thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Mike?
Hello, I'm Mike O'Connor. I hope I'm coming through. I think I unmuted myself. Yeah. So I'm from Onondaga Community College. We're an open enrollment institution in the center of New York, right outside of Syracuse, as a matter of fact. So what I'm really interested in, and what I want to talk a little bit about today, are kind of planning for what I'm going to loosely call the non-cognitive barriers that are in my students' way. I hope my dog's barking is not super loud, because I can't figure out a way to get her to calm down. But so I want to talk a little bit about the material conditions and my thoughts around those. We kind of break down non-cognitive in a few ways. So I think perhaps the easiest way for me to go about this is to begin thinking about talking a little bit about OCC and the community that we serve as an open enrollment institution. The first thing to know about Syracuse, and what I love about OCC, is that we serve a really wide range of students. I know all our institutions do, but OCC is located right on the edge of Syracuse, and Syracuse as a city has, in its interior, it has a really a generational, a group of generational, a space of generational poverty, if you will, generational urban poverty that has been racially linked. And it's, as a result of that, there's a lot of the issues that one would expect that go in with that. Things like crumbling infrastructure. For a city of our size, we have an extraordinarily high rate of violent crime. There's a large number of gang crime. We have all the issues that are endemic to larger urban school districts. So a lot of these things are kind of the structural conditions and the material conditions, as well as the educational conditions that our students are coming to us with. Surrounding the area around Syracuse is a space of really significant rural poverty as well. And this rural poverty brings with it a similar level of not only crumbling infrastructure, but spaces where there's really little, if any, infrastructure. You know, the idea of getting Wi-Fi or access to Wi-Fi in some of the neighborhoods that we serve is limited in the least. There's also, as I'm sure a lot of you know, urban spaces and rural spaces are food deserts in America. So that means we have intense levels of food insecurity and housing insecurity, both in the urban and the rural neighborhoods that we serve. So we recognize these as real conditions that our students are facing on a regular basis. The school districts in our rural areas have similar issues to those in the urban areas, but they're similar issues in terms of problems, but those problems are based in different localities and different issues. So we deal with that as well. There's a thin ring, if you will, separating these two spaces that are kind of our suburban schools. And those schools bring with them different conditions, right? They tend to be better performing schools. The districts tend to serve a more affluent student body. Those students come to us generally seen as better prepared in the ways one imagines traditionally, but they oftentimes come in with different types of issues in terms of their writing that need to be addressed as well. And then we have a wide mix of student bodies if we think about them in things about in spaces other than just their geographic spaces, you know. So we have a large number of students who are coming to college as first-time students, but we have a large number of returning veterans who are atypical students. We also have a large number of folks who are being retrained for different careers after losing their careers and things like that. These spaces are really vibrant and interesting spaces, which is probably why I love working here so much. But they bring with them a variety of issues, right, that make working with those students so interesting, right? I think it's worth thinking about this just because OCC as a space is kind of, I think, situated distinctly to speak to all the different conditions that so many different students are facing throughout the country and so many different institutions are facing out throughout the country. I think these underlying issues or problems or concerns, if you will, have been exacerbated by the current situation, and maybe some of those things that we were able to ignore historically, or at least not focus on, have kind of emerged into the front of our consciousness, if you will, because of the COVID crisis that has heightened those levels of those kinds of issues, right? If you will, they've exposed the contradictions at the core of American society, right? So if I move on to this and I begin thinking about how these conditions, if it will, have been central to our thinking at our institution and how we're going to reform or think about how to best meet these students' needs, right? We've thought about it largely through thinking about non-cognitive barriers. We developed an ALP program loosely based on the Community College of Baltimore County's model. And when we did that, we did it because we recognized that the difficulty our students were having so often in freshman composition and in developmental composition were generally not that they couldn't get commas right. It usually wasn't that they just couldn't figure out how to punctuate a sentence, or darn it, if only they could figure out what a subordinate clause was, everything would be great. We actually found it had more to do with these non-cognitive barriers. And that was why we found the CCBC model so interesting. And we began breaking these non-cognitive barriers down a little bit to kind of better understand what was going on. And we kind of broke them down into things like economic or material and infrastructural issues. These are things like, the tech divide, access to Wi-Fi, coverage for childcare, housing, food insecurity. I won't bore you with the research into this area, but I'm sure you've all bumped into it in a variety of different spaces to recognize the way the material conditions of our students affect their ability to be successful in college. Then we also thought about it as family and household issues. These are things like, work schedule, coverage of childcare. In terms of remote learning, we think about it in terms of access to computing resources or technological resources. For a lot of our houses, there are multiple students who are in multiple different levels of education. So we might have a house that has a student in kindergarten, a student in 3rd or 4th grade, students in middle school and high school, as well as a student accessing college. And all of that being done with maybe 1 or 2, Chromebooks at best. And so those families have to use those resources in really careful ways. And that means there's got to be a certain amount of flexibility, if you will. And then we broke it down into affective and non-academic issues or skills. And one of the first things we think about this is students' conception of themselves as a learner, as a writer, as a reader, as a student, and how a student thinks about themselves and how they've learned to think about themselves by their engagement with formal education and the trauma that often means to students is, I think, really important. When a student approaches the first day of class already thinking they're unlikely to be successful, carrying with them the baggage of multiple moments where teachers have told them that they weren't going to be successful because they either weren't smart enough, weren't trying hard enough, or came from the wrong background. That's something they drag with them into the classroom, and they're always waiting for that other shoe to drop. So trying to figure out ways to address that in the classroom was tough, and then thinking about that in a remote classroom becomes even harder. In addition to those kind of those non-cognitive affective issues, there's also kind of things like what we sometimes call adulting or colleging issues, like time management, which is a problem for many of our students. But when it comes to remote learning, it's so much harder, because when students show up to class and they feel guilty because they're not prepared or something like that, when their only interface is either through a Zoom session like this or through non-synchronous online modalities, then there isn't that same pressure on them to be prepared in the same kinds of way. There's not the same accountability. So time management skills become even more difficult. Study skills become even more important. Things like that. In addition,
2 more minutes.
Oh, 2 more minutes. Okay. Well, then really quickly, I'll just say we're also kind of grounding these in recognition, the emerging recognition in higher ed about trauma-informed pedagogy and our needs to recognize ACE scores, student backgrounds. This is especially true with students of color. I mean, communities of color and the experience of institutional racism is undoubtedly traumatic and has to be addressed. So when we thought about this and the way it exacerbates students' experiences, one of the things that we've tried to come up with is a pedagogy that's really located on the individual experience of the student and embraces that. And it requires an intense amount of flexibility and we call it flexible generosity, right? A generous spirit that recognizes the student's full individuality, that plans for it. I was so struck by Joelle's notion of slow teaching and slow pedagogy, because I think that need to, although I'm feeling myself in the exact opposite space right now, that need to take a step back and slow down and give students some space and give yourself space to respond is going to be essential. We are going to experience some really significant problems over the semester. There's no doubt about that. Our students will be experiencing those things too. And so to plan for it and plan flexibility into our courses through things like labor-based grading, as Laura pointed out, but also through things like flexibility around due dates. If we are doing remote learning, allowing students to access it through saved lectures or saved class periods as opposed to just synchronous class period. Yes, synchronicity is going to be important because of the accountability of it, but recognizing that not all students can be synchronous at all times and that we have to have forgiveness built into that, I think is going to be essential, that kind of generosity of spirit, if you will. Figuring out ways to contact our students in ways that don't feel judgmental, that use non-transactional language. Right? We have a tendency to fall back on bureaucratic language. If you don't do this, then this will happen, right? Whereas sometimes we encourage our faculty to really think about just reaching out in ways like, hey man, I noticed you weren't here. I'm worried about you. Is everything okay? Right? But starting out from that moment of shared humanity in this space and shared vulnerability is going to be really important, I think, moving forward, and figuring out ways to do that is kind of essential. And that shared humanity is essential because I think it talks about accountability, but it goes both ways, right? So not only does it mean we tell our students what they can expect, what we expect of them, but we also want our students to know what they can expect of us. And that means that I'm gonna fail, you know? I mean, this is a new world that I'm trying to figure out. And I want my students to know that there are moments I'm gonna fail, and I expect them to hold me accountable, but I also want them to be generous to the moments that I'm not as successful as I wanna be. And I think that shared humanity is gonna go both ways, and I'm gonna provide them with that same generosity and that recognition, right? That when they fail, that's a moment for growth, and we're all going to create this class and grow together because I can learn from them and they can learn from me. And I think that values their experience in ways that I hope will really be essential to their success. And then lastly, this is a small thing, but this is going to require a lot of work from us as we move forward. It's a lot of reflection on our own experience as teachers, and our students are experiencing this as trauma. And I think it's important to recognize that we as faculty are experiencing this traumatically as well. And build into your day moments for your own reflection. Encourage your students to reflect, but then reflect back for yourself and really think consciously about self-care. Right? Lean on each other, lean on everybody, because that's the only way we're going to get through this, right? It takes a village, as Hillary Clinton said, to raise a child. It's going to take a whole college, and I think it's going to take a whole higher ed community for us to get through this in a way that makes us better as a community on the other side. I apologize, I know I went long, but.
No worries. In fact, Mike, I was going to add just a few things, especially because Christian is not here, and we'll try to do it by 50. In fact, the last 4 points that you raised, shared accountability, that accountability goes both ways, that the language of accountability phrased in terms of threat and discipline is not for this time, and the need for generosity and kindness, including kindness to ourselves, are really what I was going to highlight. But let me add 1 or 2 more things along the same lines of what Mike was saying and other colleagues were saying earlier. As I'm preparing for the fall, I have been finding in this strange situation where everything that I try to hold students accountable for, responsible for, be able to do, I'm finding that sort of like a boomerang that bounces back at me. So I was thinking this is a semester when everything is flipped, not just a class meeting is flipped and we start meeting students in our classroom, in our offices, but everything is flipped. Accountability is flipped. And I have 3 A's here. Agency needs to be flipped. Accommodation needs to be flipped. And what I mean by that is, for example, agency. Quality at this point cannot be the same thing as, okay, I'm gonna create a mark up here for everybody to reach. But instead, we'll have to look at it as, well, it's gonna be the amount of distance each of my students are gonna travel from where they are. So I'm gonna reward them and motivate them and support them to go as far as they can from where they are. So that's flipping. Instead of an end point, it is start point, right? That's what Laura was saying with the contract rating the approach. Similarly, rigor. It's not going to be like, I'm a tough guy and I'll put this language in my syllabus and I'll make you follow them or meet the demands. No. That rigor is going to be through motivation. If I'm able to motivate my students to do the best they can, that's rigor for now. And in fact, the flipping of quality and rigor, accountability and responsibility may be actually an exposure of how bad our methods of approaching quality has always been in normal times. I hope actually we take away kindness and generosity and the ability to look in the mirror and say, geez, this approach is not motivating people. This is not responsibility, it's threat. It's not accountability, it's just unkind, right? Beyond the pandemic. So similarly, quality, rigor, structure. Structure is not going to be coming from enforcing the schedule and specifications of the course and the assignments, but instead by being there. So students can keep moving forward and seek support as needed and bank on us. So that's my agency part, quality, rigor, and structure. Let me share the note that I'm speaking from on the chat box, so that just in case. And I will also share 2 links to 2 resources. I have 2 more points. Accommodation. The accommodation can't be simply asking students to bring a doctor's note. That's going too far. Not at this time. A lot more accommodation is going to be necessary. And it's not going to be as simple as expecting that everything can be documented. No way. Even in normal times, the person who is not able to bring the doctor's note is the person who is not able to go to the doctor in the first place. And therefore, this accountability is going to come from guidelines for students to stay on track. Flexibility and access-conscious guidelines to stay on track. It's going to come from trust to reach out to us. It's not going to come from the accessibility center's note that we have to follow. It's going to be, as I've said, I'm trying to say, come from trust as necessary, but not only trust of us trusting students, it's going to come from students trusting us, right? If they don't trust us, that whole notion of accommodation and requesting for flexibility is not going to happen. They're going to suffer and not even share. And then finally, making commitment appealing. If accommodation must work, we must also make commitments appealing. For example, if we post video responses for all the classes that students may miss, this has been a standard practice. Universities demanding that we record any synchronous sessions and make them available for students. I was thinking, I'm going to make students just post a reading response to the missed class. And you can imagine the quality of those reading responses, right? They're faking it. They're watching part of it and they're posting a paragraph just to get the credit. And then I was thinking, wait, I must make it appealing to come to class in the first place. And then if they miss the class, they should be able to skip the reading response in the first place, right? Because yes, I can make it a little harder, a little boring to write the discussion board post by skipping class. But how do I know that the student isn't sick or someone is not sick at home, so that I may my hard ass technique of making things difficult and one thing appealing, more appealing than another? Well, ultimately I decided if I can make what is important appealing, it doesn't matter what I want them to do. If they want to do what needs to be done, they will do it when they can. And so I started providing students sort of netiquettes that I shared in the link, the second link. No, the first one. And I realized that students don't do well in, let's say, video conference classes because they don't know what is right and what is not right. You can't just not tell students to be prepared for college, like Mike was saying, colleging, adulting, right? To be prepared to come to class, and when they come, you can't just yell at them to turn on their videos. It is, one of my students revealed to me later on that she was coming to class from the closet. Right? And if that student wants to stay in the couch and turn the video off, I shouldn't be that terrible person to force. But however, I do believe that sometimes having this frank, open conversation about what is effective, asking students to be prepared to come to video classes like they would come to the office, if the regular classrooms, if possible, right? these kinds of informational, inspirational, collaborative, feedback-based, survey-based mechanisms of enforcing some levels of good practices can actually shift accountability from threat and fear to doing it right. Because oftentimes, if students know that they should, when possible, try to come to Zoom class as they would in a real class, then they would do it. So I don't want to say more, it's 50. I have also shared another op-ed that I recently wrote after observing people being tyrannical in my home country, the South Asian region where I come from. And if you enjoy, please read that. Okay, the floor is open. And now we'll go back to your notes. We have plenty of time. We have 40 minutes. And because we are 35 of us, I am thinking maybe we should have a full group discussion for 10-15 minutes and take a 10-15 minute small group discussion break, maybe come back and say goodbye. How about that? Because we're too many to have a chance to speak in this format. So next 10-15 minutes, any notes, any questions for the panelists? In fact, any questions for the panelists, and then we'll go from there. Anyone?
I have a question. Oh, do you want me to raise hand? Are we raising hands or?
No, that's fine. Just talk. Raise voice.
Hi, I'm Marianne Duffy. So Joelle, I'm curious with the slow grading and or the slow pedagogy. I'm wondering how you are mechanically setting that up, and also if you are increasing the peer review assignments and relying on them to look at each other's things and comment more, or if you're going to keep sort of the peer review options the same. I'm just wondering like how many people are doing more peer review to cut down on their own grading as a way to mitigate the overwhelming grading.
I'm not cutting down on peer review, but I am actually making peer review only during my online weeks. And so I'm looking at my in-class weeks as just being primarily discussion-based, brainstorming-based, kind of topic-based weeks. And I'm going to keep peer review on my online weeks as before. I will say a couple things about the way that I structure peer review though, and I think most people in this community probably do this, but I'm only using peer review kind of as peer response, right? So global issues only, especially for specifically the class that I'm teaching in the fall that I've been talking about, which is primarily a group of marginalized students, right, who are funded by EOP and who, when commenting on local issues, it is not, right, it's not what I want them to gain from the course. And I would also say that the peer review has to be taught to them. So I actually scaffold the entire first thing with a screencast that I kind of walk through based on another student and what they have done so that they can then do it. And I use Google Docs, right? I put them in a shared folder. And so I primarily make those my online weeks. I will also say that in trying to maneuver between these two kind of different types of teaching settings, I have, and like, you know, I really like the word structure that's being used instead of maybe standards, because I have really tried to actually structure with some rigor, meaning, you know, every Monday I have planned to, like, you know, post during my online weeks the video or the lecture that I want them to watch, right? I have a discussion moderator in each of my smaller groups. That discussion moderator is in charge of posing a question to their small group on Monday morning, on Wednesday morning, and on Friday morning. Everyone in a separate kind of discussion has a final reflective thought on Friday that is posted. So I've created like kind of very specific writing kind of assignments in this way. With that said, I have also, as Laura kind of commented in the chat, some of those assignments are kind of like, you know, a certain number of points that you do, right? And you get the credit for doing them. You know, I'm trying to think about this discussion-based assessment in certain online portions of my class that are important for me, just for the idea of creating community and kind of collaboration. Does that make sense, Maria?
Yes, that does. Thanks.
Other colleagues, what do you do regarding student collaboration and peer support, peer review? I use rubrics.
Uh, just as an aside, and this is a little bit off tangent, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and my colleague Wendy Stewart, who is here, I know she has been kind of part of a conversation that I've talked about it with, and it has to do with kind of the clunky nature of discussions in Blackboard. And we have several colleagues who are using Slack, who really like Slack for discussions, and I haven't kind of embrace Slack yet, and I don't know why, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to use it or not, or if I want to just keep it in the LMS. And so I guess I wanted to know if any of you have experience with Slack or what your opinions are of it, because I am absolutely on the border and I'm not sure about what I want to do.
I used Slack when our administrators was misbehaving a few years ago. Since then, it hasn't been that appealing.
Wendy?
I have not used Slack. I've used GroupMe with Writing Center tutors, and that's been, you know, good for administrative things. But in an asynchronous learning experience I'm taking part in as a learner to try and figure out all this right now, I've heard concerns raised about FERPA with using something outside of the learning management system. So I need to figure out, you know, I mean, the youth today, they know how to check their email, right?
Yeah.
But
well, and I agree with Wendy, and we had talked about this in a pedagogy group we're in a little bit, because I want to be flexible and I want to create this community for people to discuss things, but at the same time, I'm also trying to kind of teach a certain amount of cultural capital in the academic community to these brand new freshmen, right? I want to teach them how to interact in certain spaces in a certain way, and there's Slack feels at times to me really informal, and I think in some aspects that's a great way to pull in an informal conversation and make people feel, you know, comfortable. I think it's like kind of a text messaging thread kind of thing, which I think is great. But at the same time, I also have created assignments where I sometimes want students to be a little more formal, you know, to think about the response to, you know, a certain written assignment or text, and to pull that into our class. And so at the same time of, you know, being choosy about my technology. I don't want to pull in too many technologies to overwhelm, right? I want to be thoughtful about what I'm doing to kind of engage some of those questions that I'm working through. So that's where I am in my life.
My name is Rita Nizami. Sorry, my video, my camera is not working for some reason. I just wanted to share, I'm from Stony Brook University. I just wanted to share an important moment last semester, which was the breakout rooms. I think that generated such vivid discussions among the students, and they were able to come back to the main room and share their discussions with others. And that created some kind of trust among the students, and there was great bonding that took place. In fact, the students were really encouraged, felt encouraged to join the Zoom meetings, because they felt that this brought some normalcy back into their lives. So I think I do feel that Zoom is a great way to teach online, especially because students are able to see each other and kind of touch base with each other and look forward to seeing each other every week, twice a week.
Thank you, Rita. I think we should preserve some element of asynchronicity, if and when possible, for students to meet with us and with each other. And I think the idea of taking asynchronicity and synchronicity as black and white, as, you know, mutually exclusive, is dangerous. I mean, at least we should be available during office hours for them to meet us.
Absolutely.
Individually or in groups. And if some universities are demanding that we be there during regular class hours, where the class would have been, I think we should be there. I mean, I think I have bought Bluetooth earplugs so that I can work in my garden while the students are coming to my office hours. But that interaction, look at this interaction. We would never, ever, ever achieve this interaction with asynchronous emails or something, or Slack. Thank you, Rita.
On that same point, because I'm teaching also first year writing and 101, I'm anticipating about half of the students being in Asia. So synchronous there becomes almost not a moot point, but what I'm thinking about doing this term for that is having like, you know, a once a week or twice a week, 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. session for those who want to come, who, you know, are in a different time zone across the world. And one more normal time for West, you know, for our time, because it's just, everybody's just so scattered. Over the summer, I had about half and half in Asia, half here. So that's another thing that is disruptive with the synchronous planning, that I can't really do that until I find out where everybody is. So you can't really plan ahead for it other than to assume maybe that's going to be this, you know. And then you were talking about, Joelle, not having too many different softwares. I try to stay in the Google world, but now that's complicated by students in China who may not be able to access Google. So now am I going to convert everything also to Word, or, you know, how am I going to do that if I have to, which I've decided I'm not going to worry about until I find out if I have to, and then I'm going to wing it. But, you know, it's just so, everything has to be so fluid now. So I do think it's so helpful to share these ideas. But I also feel like not to put too much pressure on ourselves, to just like know we have these different tools that we may have to pull out of our back pocket at the last minute, and reconfigure, and not be so worried or hung up on how professional everything looks while we begin to do this, until we get it down. Because I already feel like the summer was only half of a success.
Marianne, that is wonderful. That synchronous office hour availability at 7 a.m. in the morning, I think is better for Chinese students than 7 p.m. because it's too early and they tend to not wake up so early. Yeah, I'm doing 3. I'm adding 1 in the middle of the night because I'm a night owl. And that is just a different office hour. That's it. I mean, we already have office hours, and all I'm saying is that office hours shouldn't go on email.
Right.
Exactly.
Back to the peer review. I'm teaching online this summer right now, and most of my students are abroad. And I have been using Google Docs and put them into groups, and they comment on each other's papers and so on, and all the same things people are saying about explaining that up front. But this term, I added another assignment at the end where they write me a reflection letter on their own performance of peer review, what they got out of it, the quality of the feedback that they left to their peers. And the letters were great. And then I asked them to assign themselves a grade. Not that they'll get that grade necessarily, but what do they think that they deserve for peer review? And it was wonderful. They were really honest. Okay, I realized after reading my peers' comments that maybe I didn't dig deep enough, or I did a pretty good job on one, but I sort of rushed the other, and I realized I should have focused more on this other part of it. And I will see if it means that the next go round is better. But they were, you know, most of them said, I think I'd probably get a B, you know, or maybe, you know, they seemed fairly honest with themselves about how they did, and maybe recognized how they could have done better. And I think I'll probably keep that up as just like an extra component to peer review to get them to think about, okay, what was really asked of me and what did I do? And I think that that's something that seemed to work.
1 more minute and then we'll go.
I think that's a great point, just to add on what Catherine just said. And that's slow, right? Because you're stretching the process, right? Which I think, I agree with you. I think it's a great idea. So great. Thank you.
Joelle, can you give me host access, or we're going to ask you to share more ideas in a little smaller group so that more of us will speak. We'll have a chance to hear from each other. for about, we are going to go until 2:30, and until 2:20-ish, I'd like you to, Joel, could you give me, go to participants, hover over my name, and give me host access, please. You're muted too. Okay, other thoughts, other ideas as we address this small technical issue? Okay. Then I'm gonna ask colleagues, there are 29 of us now, I'm gonna put 5 of us each in the rooms. I'm gonna call you back around 20. So you have about 14 minutes. Please share your ideas in more depth and detail.
Wendy, how do we get in the same room? It's hilarious.
That's great. I feel sorry for Patricia.
No.
Why?
Oh, hi, Patty. I've met you before, actually.
Yep, we have met before.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I had my camera off because I have this open window behind me and people walk by and wave and all kinds of stuff. So
we've got road construction going on. I think they're on a break right outside my window. So it's nice to meet everyone.
Yeah, I'm Joelle. Everyone. So I feel like I've spoken a lot. So if anyone else wants to kind of share or concerns.
My big concern is I've never taught online except for last semester, and I have real concerns about having them function as a class when they haven't been socialized. You know, like we had half the semester for them to sort of work pretty closely together with one another and with me in the spring before we went online. And, you know, I lost a few, I mean, more or less, right? But most of them kind of pulled it together for one another as much as for me, I think. And I'm not hearing great things about that happening over the summer, and I don't really know what to do.
I mean, I agree with that. I don't really know the great answer to that too. And I'm teaching in first, which has its own issues. But you know, I know people are experimenting with Flipgrid, right, and creating videos, and so I know that those are great ways to kind of at least create a sense of face with a person, right, and to kind of that kind of connection. But I mean, in all honesty, Wendy, all my experiences online teaching, I mean, they aren't the same, right? I mean, I just, you know, I mean, I just feel like, you know, I'm doing the best that I can to create this, but I don't ever feel like I have the same kind of, you know, connection. I mean, have any of you all have some good strategies to use the opening week or couple weeks when you're trying to establish that? Matt, Patty?
I'm teaching, I taught 2 sessions this summer. I don't know what I was thinking I was going to be stuck in my house like under COVID conditions, and I might as well teach. So I'm teaching back to back right from when spring ended until fall starts. So I don't know what I was thinking, but anyway, my first session was a Writing 102 session, and that went kind of the way my online Writing 102s always go. Kind of, there are moments, but then there are a lot of moments that I don't hear from anyone or see anyone. No one's coming during office hours. You know, I almost had to laugh with the set up office hours in the middle of the night because I'm thinking I'd do that and nobody would come. So I tried to up the value of office hours by actually scheduling, you know, mandatory. If you can't make it during these office hours, you have to come in, and doing student conferencing during those office hours. So at least they got in the habit of going to the sign-on page, putting their name in for a time slot, and then showing up. So that kind of helped make a little bit more of a personal connection. The class that I'm teaching, Grammar and Style, is upper level students who are writing and rhetoric minors, and they are much more invested. They do, you know, they come to the sessions, they have groups together that they meet on a regular basis. And so I think for the Writing 102, it's just hard to get that investment. You know, it's just not a class that any of them want to take. They're required to take it. And so I'm still working on that. I'm going to try the technique that I tried in the Grammar and Style, which was setting them up with a group right from the first day of class. And then they stay with that group the whole semester. And one of their assignments, you know, a 2-point assignment or something like that, is to show me evidence that their group met up on group chat or text messaging or however they want to meet, they can decide. But then they show me either a screenshot or some kind of evidence that they have connected, and once they do that, like at first they kind of don't want to. Once they do that, they feel like, okay, these are my people. I've got my people for the semester. And then, you know, different times during the semester, I'll say, why don't you share this with your group or go ask your group this question? Really informal things like, you know, what do you guys think we should do about this? Come back with an answer from your group. And then they'll kind of just engage with each other in an informal way. And I felt like that gave them a little bit of a sense of community. But you know, I still struggle with online teaching because I really do feel like there's no there. I'm not sure when you get to the there, it doesn't, you know.
Right. Thank you.
I would go ahead and just add, I also had some same thing, summer course. I'm with SUNY SF, I'm Kurt, and basically I did the similar thing where I did extensive required conferences early in the process. I say extensive, I mean, there were only a couple of them, but I met individually and also just sort of did an informal interview early on, just asking them, you know, basic questions about themselves. And I felt that flipped things a little bit, allowed them to see, you know, I guess, you know, practicing what you were saying, Joelle, the idea of listening in, leaning in. But I would really agree with Patricia about that informality, about just how productive the ironic spaces are. So the opening space of 5 minutes, just chatting about, hey, what's going on in Brooklyn with COVID? And just getting that feedback from students sort of broke a space. And I think that's especially facilitated by smaller groups. So when you can get those breakout sessions or you can gear them into that smaller group online, it seems to me more productive because I think they feel, like you said, it's their posse or their group. They start owning it a little bit more. And that way, I'm just trying to think out logistics, though, when I've got quite a few classes this fall, how many little small groups I can manage, if you will.
That's always my problem, too, because I want to make all these different, you know, situations. I'm like, okay, hold on, you know, because it's a feedback issue, too, you know. How can I create authentic feedback at certain moments with so many small groups? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, my only thoughts, I mean, just quickly on that was just maybe, you know, like you were saying, alternating. I was thinking, you know, first of all, I'm going to post my lectures on video and have them watch it and sort of cue that back so that the actual time when I have to do, rather than do lectures in class, more.
Right.
But I thought maybe the alternate day, if you will, the week to have the breakouts, but have them for 15 minutes, like short sprints during the same. But, you know, again, when we get into synchronous time, I'm not sure if that would work, you know, trying to require them both times, you know, during that same hour, if you will, and break that hour into like 4 units or 3 units of 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So. Sorry, Kurt, I think I was kind of mean to cut you off there.
No, it's definitely the challenge of this you know, technology. A couple of thoughts I'm having as we're having this conversation about also having the same fear of how to form community off the bat. And for me, I think these small groups on synchronous is really helpful. I didn't try it. We're using WebEx I'm at Finger Lakes Community College. It doesn't yet have that feature. We're told it will have it at the start of the semester, but I did do a week-long writing workshop this summer on Zoom, and the facilitator used a lot of these groups of 3 to 5, and we would share free writes, and we would come to consensus on questions. And it seemed like the richest time of community building was when we were in the groups of 3 to 5. And so I'm going to be trying to definitely build those into the class. And then asynchronously, we use the social reading program called Hypothesis. And I use that to engage students with interacting on model texts. And I find, you know, as they're posting, I find social reading and social annotation works much better than discussion boards for my experiences. And when we're working directly in a text and having threaded discussions in a marginal side space is a really great community building as well. So those are the 2 things I'm really going to be hoping help build community.
It's funny you said that because I was just talking to someone else who was talking about using Google Docs for a type of a collaborative note-taking online, and that she did it last semester and it worked wonderfully, more so than, you know, the discussions, because the discussions can be clunky, right? I mean, I think that's the problem with the LMS. So that's a great idea, and I'm trying to work on that. That's a good idea.
What is hypothesis?
It's a built into LMSs. We use Blackboard, as I know many of you, and you can upload PDF files, whether it's student papers for peer review or whether it's readings, and you can highlight text, and then there's a marginal sidebar in which all comments go, and it can be multimedia, it can be web linked, and so it's working directly inside of a text, and then you can comment on each other's marginal notes. So it really is a engaging way, and they have they just did a SUNY webinar last week through the professional development CPD, and it is available for free for a semester for anybody to use it. And so a lot of SUNYs I know are kind of getting on board with it right now. I've been using it for about 2 years, and it's a very, very powerful tool.
I have to see if Stony Brook has it. I've been doing a similar thing through Google Docs with my style and grammar class. I post you know, a reading and then have all of them comment, and then they can use those comments for their final essay and cite each other in their papers. So I think that's going to be kind of a cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
But I haven't had that much time to go back and add my own annotations on those readings, because and that's the problem with me with online, is I'm always spinning my wheels learning the technology and getting a new lecture posted, and I can never get back to the old posting and actually engage in the way that I want to be engaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the slow pedagogy will be nice to think about, but I don't know that I ever actually feel that.
I've made a conscientious effort, because I feel like, maybe it's my life status right now. I feel like I'm constantly rushing, right? And so I'm really trying to, because if I feel that way, they feel that way in tons of different ways, just like Mike was kind of saying. So I'm really just trying to, and I tried to do that in the spring, right? I mean, I think that's what I'm carrying over at that moment when everyone was panicked, right? And it was like, oh my God, I have to teach synchronously now online. What does that even mean? You know, I tried to just focus on, okay, what are the main things I want them to know, right? And it, you know, and how do I convey those things? And it seems like such a simple question, but actually sometimes I forget, like, you know, sometimes it gets lost in the minutia of all the things I'm trying to teach. So I've really tried to, in the planning, to focus and just to really think about that at this moment, right? Like I kind of said, I don't know, but I agree, it's difficult, right? And like I said, I'm a new hire at Binghamton, and I've been hired with 2 other lecturers, one in environmental studies and one in psychology, and they're always very much my standards and what do I do, and my, you know, and I try, well, wait, we're in like this moment, you know, and we have to think about this moment more than that, you know, and so it's interesting to just think about that dynamic, I think. Anyways, that's my take.
I liked what Shyam said about making commitment appealing, but I don't know that he followed up on that. So how do you make commitment appealing? What is it that you do? Because commitment is appealing. Yeah, great. But what is that, you know, how does that come across in an online asynchronous environment for a class that nobody wanted to take in the first place?
Right.
It's all sticks and no carrots. And nobody's motivated by carrot sticks, so
Well, I think for the other agency was something I've been really focusing on, and for me, it's giving students more and more choice of the assignments, of how they participate, and this is where I would link it to labor-based grading, which I experimented with this year. They have choice of what kind of labor they want to do. You can do so many posts in hypothesis. You can use VoiceThread. You can come to the synchronous class. And so, so by having a choice in how much labor you do gives more agency. And I just find agency really boosts people's level of commitment. So I'm finding all these pieces really work well together.
I love that idea of different ways of them contributing. If somebody would rather leave voice threads, or somebody would rather, I think that's interesting to build in.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of those comments, I think for me, Laura, when she was talking about I haven't done labor-based grading. because I still have to kind of work out in my mind somehow. You know, there are students who have other responsibilities, right? And they're going to be in my class for the B-, right? And maybe that's what their contract is going to be. And that has to be okay with me. You know what I mean? I mean, I think I still am working from a very traditional, sometimes like, well, reach for the A, right? Of course I want everyone to reach for the A, but there are different responsibilities that everyone have, and that's kind of what it means, right? And so I like what you're saying, Kurt, about this idea of agency, because I think it's an important thing to negotiate with myself, right? They create their own agency, right? And I am just like kind of become like the scaffolder of it or whatever, however you want to think about it. So I might also try to put, try to figure out, haven't made the plans to do the contract based yet, but I'm thinking of it.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. No, right? It's interesting.
I'd like to figure that out as well.
I don't do a formal contract, but I definitely have tons of elements of contract-based grading, you know, just for contributing 3 times to the discussion board. You get, so in my class, you get a 75 just for turning everything in, you know, so I don't have them sign a formal contract, so I don't set up that agency ahead of time, but I make it very clear from the beginning that there's a whole group of assignments that all you have to do is turn them in, and then you will get credit for them. So, you know, I kind of try to balance it a little bit. I haven't had the time to write the formal contract and get all that language right, and you know, really put the whole philosophy embedded in it. And I can't do all that, but I can say 2 points just for turning in your peer review. You know, I don't mind what you say. I'm not going to grade you on the quality of the review, just 2 points because you did it.
Yeah, holistic, yeah.
Do you guys find it hard to keep track of all those elements? I mean, sort of tabulating as all, you know, 2 points for this, 2 points for that kind of thing?
I use Blackboard extensively now for all of my grading. So I just set it up, and all you have to do is send me a link or send me a PDF, and then you get the 2 points. And if I want to put a comment in there, I will, but most of the time I just go through and 2 points and 2 points, and oh, I really like what you said there on the peer review. That was so supportive. And then I move on, you know, and it was hard to keep track of on paper, but on Blackboard, it kind of all takes care of it for me. You just set up the assignment, and then you don't lose track of things, you know, it's all there, and they don't lose track of where they're at.
And you can also use Blackboard for integrating it with labor-based, because you can give 0, you can have things worth 0, and it can just be complete or not. And so whether it's VoiceThread or Hypothesis, you can link them to the grade book, and you can just kind of, you can just mark them getting it in on the date that it was, you know, the window that it was due. So that does help with the management of it.
Yeah, I mean, I just try to, and I try as much as often, like to really stake out, you know, when I'm doing informal kind of writing assessments, that it can just be a couple of points. And then when I'm also modeling, and especially in the discussions, right? And I find myself earlier in the semester to be commenting a lot more than like in the middle, because I do want them to scaffold that own kind of Socratic, and I am doing discussion moderators, right, for the first time in small groups in Blackboard, right? So I have a discussion moderator in each group each week, right, every other week for my online weeks, and like I said, they have to pose questions. So I'm hoping that will also help, you know, foster the sense of community, but then also take some of the onus off my paper, you know, off of all the text in front of me. Perfect.
So I realized that I was a few minutes beyond the time that I said 20, but we do have 6 minutes, and I really would love to hear from all 5 groups. Any points, any major shared broader point that was discussed in your group? Take a minute, share with everybody. I'm curious. I did go to one room, but I couldn't go to more.
We talked a little bit more about grading contracts and how we might adapt and use them. And we also talked about trying to figure out the right balance of reasonable and unreasonable expectations for our students in an online course.
Laura, do you have anything that you can share on grade contracts? Maybe this is the time when Amy Beth can say, blog, please.
Oh, yes, we are I actually have a lot of inspiration from this webinar for a new post. Just I'll compile all the links that were shared on the SUNY Rights page, just so like a synthesis of what we've discussed and what all the panelists have shared for people who haven't been here. But really, you know, SUNY Rights is a wide open space for exchange between us as a community. And so anything you're both took from the spring or working on for the fall, or, you know, it can be sort of a personal reflection or a strategic craft of pedagogy type of piece. You know, it's a very, very open space. Please just reach out and happy to share it. And again, I'll try to synthesize everything that came up today in a new blog post.
Thank you. I'll send you the chat record. Laura, if you could, you know, write, if you have something especially, or if you can even write a paragraph or 2 or 3, we would all greatly appreciate it, because I too want to learn more. Other colleague?
For what it's worth, both of Asao Inui's books on labor-based grading are actually up for free online as PDFs. You can download them, you can access them as HTMLs. So I can throw links to those from the WAC if people want.
Can you please do that on the chat box, Mike? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
All right, other colleagues?
I mean, our group, we talked about a lot of different things, but we talked a lot about kind of collaborative note-taking a little bit with Google Docs. Some of us have experimented with that. I know Kurt was talking a little bit about Hypothesis, where you'd upload a PDF file and students can collaboratively also comment. That's in his LMS though, so you'd have to have that, but it would also work on a Google Docs or something like that. We talked about labor-based grading a little bit, and then we also, Patty mentioned a little bit about kind of these informal spaces that she has to create community, right? Just to, you know, talk about how something's happening during the day or something that someone's doing. And so the ways that kind of incorporating even those small informal spaces has helped her create a type of maybe commitment or community.
Joelle.
We spent most of our time thinking about peer review and different ways of approaching peer review. And without boring everybody about diving into the details, what I'll say I'm going to walk away with as the most important aspect of it is we really have to create spaces for students to love on each other's work. That notion that our students oftentimes approach each other's work from a position of criticality, of being critical and negative. And it's not always the case, but sometimes it's easier to point out the mistake. And our students don't have a lot of experience, or at least my students typically don't have a lot of experience telling people how much they love their work. So creating spaces for students to talk about what they like in each other's work and why, either on a sentence level, which is what I always do, or on a more content-based level. I think getting our students to kind of talk about what they like in writing, particularly in each other's writing, can be really useful. So I'm going to walk away with that as being really useful for me.
One more, and I'm going to save the last minute for Brandon to tell us about the next webinar. I think it's in the making now.
Our group revisited the idea of students writing a reflective letter that Catherine had shared earlier, not just in a variety of contexts, and the kind of honesty and self-reflection that manifests in that process for students. And then towards the end, we were also talking about the benefits of collaboration and devising opportunities for students to engage with one another as the most robust and engaging learning experiences online. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, unless we can borrow a few minutes, maybe let's start with Brandon. Share with us.
So my group is, oh, go ahead.
Yep. No.
So a couple of my colleagues and I are going to be presenting next Thursday, which is going to be the next webinar in the series. It's going to be titled Living with Uncertainty, Supporting Learning in a Dynamic World. The primary focus that we're going to be examining is what role an institution can have in helping students adjust to all the chaos in their lives. You know, we're really concerned about getting students to understand what it means to be a student again at a time where, you know, learning is happening at their kitchen table, or in some cases, like Sam mentioned earlier, in a closet. How do we get students in that mindset so that they can even begin to be successful? We're going to look at, the role that institutions can play, some of the support services we have. I'm going to be presenting with some of my colleagues from Jefferson Community College. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we're working on to try to help our students and see what other institutions are doing as well, and what some of you guys are doing and what programs you have to maybe help our students be successful. We know it's not ideal. I think if there's anything that we all would agree that we struggle with right now, is that separation between our private and work life. It's really hard to kind of maintain that barrier when, sometimes your bedroom or your living room or your kitchen table is your classroom. Imagine what it's like, we have that discipline and that structure where it's even a challenge for us at times. Imagine what it's like for some of our students, some of whom are coming out of some really bad experiences in their high school and the way that it finished up. So those are some of the things we're going to be looking at, is some strategies and some of the things that our institution's working on to try to help our students be successful this fall.
There are so many topics on which we have, wanted to do discussions, workshops, webinars, and with everybody's help, hopefully we can continue to put together panels, discussions, workshops. So please reach out to Joelle, who is our sort of lead person on the webinar series. The email that you might see, the generic SUNY, what is it, Joelle, what is the email address?
I'll write it. Oh, the SUNY Cal address.
Yeah.
No. I'll write my email. How about that? And then I'll also write SUNY Cal.
Okay, please. So the generic email or Joelle Mann's email, please reach out if you would like to join a webinar as a panelist. And whenever you see this email blast, please, don't hesitate to share with your colleagues. In fact, writing teachers' ideas are often useful for teachers beyond writing classrooms. And therefore, if you want to invite a colleague from, other departments, I believe they too could, get something, take something away about assignments and assessment and peer review and whatnot. So thank you very, very much. We're out of time. To the panelists, Joelle, Laura, Mike, and thank you very much to members of the audience for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I really look forward to seeing you again and again this fall. We're having a few webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.